Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh, super.
Yeah, we can hear you, Miles.
Good. Good morning or good afternoon.
Hi, Miles. Good afternoon, everyone.
We can hear you, Miles.
Good. Or good afternoon.
Hi, Miles. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, Moulshri. Hello, Hasti. Hello, Mike and Paul.
Hi, Miles. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, Moulshri. Hello, Hasti. Hi. Hello, Mike and Paul.
Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, Moulshri. Hello, Hasti. Hi. Hello, Mike and Paul.
May I request everyone to please turn off their mics? Excellent. Hello, everyone. What wonderful presentations we had. Thank you very much to all the three speakers. I'd now like to invite Professor Hsiao-Wei, who's the chair of ANI and also the board member from Taiwan at TICCIH, to make some comments.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you very much for our three outstanding speakers to share their many years expertise with us. I don't say I will make a comment because I see many of you are much more senior than me and has a lot more experience. But however, I would like to share with something which I learned from you together. Yeah, so I think from Dr. Ognoffer's talk, I think we can see he particularly mentioned about the strategic value of industrial heritage and its broad application all over the world. I think this is quite encouraging and give many of our Asian colleagues has a much more broad idea in terms of how to reuse it and how to protect it. Yeah, and the second point, I think he also mentioned about it's very important to build up a concrete link between historic and live industry. I think this is also involved with some of conservation for the working industry and also the community. And nowadays, I think we see more and more like some for example, like we see some steel industry in China and also in Korea and also in Japan. They all gradually open some for the public to involve with such a live working industry. And the third point is about the education. Yeah, I think British is very particularly good on the heritage education, and we can also see how it's coming to the use on the industrial heritage, such as the STEM activities. So I think this is a great idea to engage young people and some more community to get involved with that. So personally, I think I get a lot of inspiration, and thank you very much for your sharing an excellent example all over the world, include the Catalonia Industrial Network and Polish and so on. Yeah. Okay, then the second one is about Dr. Robinson's presentation. This is also really specifically echo to our Ernest thing. I think Mike bring up the problem of the lack of the sharing expertise and knowledge, and how to involve with more public engagement in together on the conservation of industrial heritage. I think this also emphasizes the end of ANI and what's the point and how important of the ANI establishes for the global world. Yeah, and the second thing is about Mike also talked about the cultural roots, which can help to tell a bigger story. I think this is very true. And this is also why we already talk about we want to build up this Taiwan's root of industrial heritage. because we try to connect the smaller cultural heritage site together in order to telling a bigger story. And this can also help to the protection and also the national identity for our industrial heritage. Yeah, and I'm also very impressed about how you use the example to talk about how to bring the meanings to the cultural heritage and make it relevant to people in Iron Bridge and other particularly case study. And lastly, I think I would like to thank for Paul's excellent example on this kind of thematic study on the forest railway. I think this gives a very good example for later on if we want to develop this kind of thin route of forest railway in Asia. I think that could be our kind of brief database for our studies and for the future cooperation and so on. So I think this is my impression, and this is what I learned from all of you today. Yeah. So I give the mic back to Moulshri.
Thank you, Professor Lin, and thank you to the three speakers. I found that your talks had a common, urging us to do something in common through all of these, which is to bring together this vast amount of resource that we have with us across the world. And if I can say in 3 words, which stood out for me amongst all your presentations was to make connections, to build communities, and to build confidence, a word that, Miles, you briefly touched upon, but I think is very, very crucial for us in this field. So I would say these 3 things is my takeaway, but it's been such an illuminating afternoon for us. I'd like to open the floor for questions, and I have one for each of you to begin. So Miles, I have the first question to you, which is, of course, very topical today when we're talking about COVID. We're also dealing with multiple other crises well before COVID hit, climate change, intolerance, authoritarianism, violence against women and children, people of color, etc. So we're a crisis-ridden world. Do you see new forms of solidarity emerging amongst industrial heritage sites and museums to respond to these? You've spoken very well about these great examples like in Kuna, etc., which are leading the way. Do you see some new forms of connections emerging? Could you talk about that?
Thanks, Moulshri, and yes, I do, because one of the themes that I tried to address in my presentation is the fact that industrial heritage is the people's heritage. And so if you, for example, go to somewhere like Detroit and look at the car industry, most of the workers in the car industry ended up being Afro-American. And so it's very much their heritage, and that applies across the world. So we have an advantage in that respect. And I mentioned also that we have some really difficult contested histories within our remit, which includes slavery in the UK's case and in Scotland's case in particular. And we were one of the best, well, we were very good at slaving at the height of the slave trade. And most of our industrial development relied upon it heavily. And yet that doesn't come through in a lot of the way our history and our industrial heritage is presented. So we're going to have to change that. And that poses great opportunities in terms of education and in terms of the identity of many communities that have often been marginalized. And as you said the word, which is confidence. And what I think is really important is we need to step out of these difficult histories. And Asia is full of difficult industrial histories, and most of industrial heritage has terrible links to warfare, and was often industrial development was driven by warfare, whatever it was. So we need to address these issues with confidence and look at the histories are fascinating, and there's good parts, flip sides to the bad parts as well. in terms of humanity. So the confidence, as you say, is absolutely crucial, especially as what we have to do is to influence decision makers who determine the future of our industrial heritage. And we have to put together something that is attractive to them and to the people that have the resources that can be invested in our industrial heritage. So exactly what you say, this is a really, really exciting way forward for us. And we can grab victory from the jaws of crisis, whatever that crisis is, and particularly, as I said, in the case of climate change and sustainability and sustainable tourism and so on. So there's so much we can do if we take a positive approach.
Yes, thank you. Miles, Professor Robinson touched upon these ideas and made a great impression with this process of gathering together thematically sites that can be strategically, but also technically, conceptually be such an important, vital thing for us to present new ways, present new histories, stories that haven't been told before. I wonder, Professor Robinson, whether you would like to, comment on certain themes that you see emerging when we extend this idea of roots of industrial heritage into this part of the world with Asia and Asia Pacific. What kind of themes do you think could be, the new themes to gather together these ideas?
I think just following up on Miles's comments as well, I mean, there is a lot of contested histories in the Asian region, not only between Asia and the rest of the world in terms of colonization, but also within, in an intra-regional sense as well. And I think one of the joys of working with cultural roots is that forces people to think about these relationships both in a historical context, but also in a contemporary context as well. Where are those flashpoints in the past which either still exist or maybe need to be overcome? And I think that certainly, and again, it echoes something that Miles said, there are common languages within the context of industrial heritage. People who are involved in the mining industry share, common emotions, common experiences, common language, common technology. And again, there's no difference, when you put, old mining communities together to talk to one another, which I've done in the past, they have a lot to share, but they also have a lot of grievances as well. And again, it's a very interesting way of bringing people together to talk about those difficult issues of decolonization, which is something that we have to look at. And I know a little bit of work about in Cuna in Spain and how it's linked back to what happened in South America and the colonialization of South America. So again, there are very difficult stories to uncover, but only by trying to bring publics together and communities together. I think we can allow a voice to some of these really difficult issues. But I would also say, and it reflects this notion of solidarity. What cultural roots do is they create critical mass, and it's much more difficult for politicians to ignore critical mass. And that allows access to resources. And we've seen this in many, I do a lot of work with the Council of Europe's Cultural Roots program, and it's very hard for individual sites sometimes to access resources, access expertise. But when you put them together and you have this solidarity, it's much easier to access politicians and resources in that way. So that's where I stand on this.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that comment. I would add another C to the 3 C's that Miles raised, which is critical. I take critical as an important word from your discussion, saying we need to talk about critical heritage. And we also need to talk about this critical mass, this idea that we need to achieve this politically and otherwise by working together. So very, very important for all of us here in Asia Pacific to reflect on this. I think, thank you once again. Paul, over to you. And my question is, with forest railways and my experience, and I'm reflecting from where I'm sitting in India, is that the forest railways are fighting two parallel battles. One is to save the forest and the other is to save the railways. Is there something wrong that we are doing? How do we reconcile this?
Thank you. Yes, there's a contested history with forest railways as well, because of the shocking legacy of forest clearance that has happened throughout the world. But again, there's this opens to a new strength, as the other two speakers have noted, because around the globe there's a move to sustainable management of forests, and so in my presentation I had a couple of modern forest railways in New Zealand, and they're involved with the harvesting of forests that are run on a sustainable basis, and of course with climate change, there's an increased need for people to understand and engage with forests. They're a source of wood, which is really an ultimate sustainable resource, which is recyclable and biodegradable. And they're also a fantastic carbon store and an oxygen producer. So forests are very much part of the future. And I think those countries that have got wonderful forest railways remaining, they provide a very special way for people to get into those forests, and the operators of those railways can provide experiences that are relevant to the future way we manage forests. And so in my presentation, I drew attention to three outstanding examples of forest railways in Asia that exists. There's Alishan in Taiwan, there's Anbo in Japan, and I think my pronunciation's right, Cepu, that's in Java. So Hasty can train me up on that. And look, all of these three have adapted to sustainable development models. So they're on the right track already. The logging has been ceased for 10 or even 50 years in these areas, and they now carry visitors, they carry tourists instead of logs, and they take them into areas that are managed as protected natural forests. So the tourists use the railways to access their forest experience. And, the railways could actually be used to support programs, for example. I don't know if countries can get people to have volunteer holidays where they go for a week up in the mountains and assist with replanting, but some of these forest railways are ideally suited to even supporting that sort of an experience. So I think there's a great future for them, because they offer a unique way of participating in something that is so relevant to our future and to the survival of the planet. So the sort of contested history part can become part of the pointed to where we need to go in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to continue with making a list of all the good C words from the conversation. So I add contested and climate change. I think this industrial heritage, forest railways, mountain railways as sites for coping on building resilience in this time of crisis is a very important point that you have raised. Thank you very much once again. I'm going to now invite Hasti to make some comments and observations before I take on questions from the audience. Hasti, over to you.
Good morning from Amsterdam. Hi. First of all, Paul, you spell Cepu very right. Thank you very much. I'm very proud you remember Java. I would like to trigger your ideas from all of the speakers about something that bothering me so much, because on daily basis I have contacts with practitioners of preservation in Indonesia. And it's not that there is a lack of money for conservations there for adaptive reuse. The awareness about cultural heritage, especially industrial heritage, is getting better now, and they have some initiatives to take adaptive reuse from old sites. What's bothering me is that because of lack of probably knowledge and certainly lack of experiences, finally the adaptive reuse of industrial heritage become a kind of beautification projects. The intentions was good, but because of lack of experience, so they, according to the conservation guidelines, let's say, even to the standard of the environmental friendly approach, it is wrong, because, for example, that they cut the old trees and they replace it with a tent, a kind of tent for shadow, that kind of things, and beautifications. In I think in Southeast Asia that I know for sure happens quite often. So it's not that because lack of awareness, but because of the lack of experience. What you all of you have a lot of experience. What are your ideas how to prevent more of beautification projects of this good intention? It's very pragmatical. But if I see all of the examples from Europe, from other parts of the world, they all look like perfect projects, of course, at least from the physical point of view. But yeah, what are your ideas about it? Yes, please, Miles.
I think good question, Hasti, and a lot of this sits with the need for authenticity and integrity, which are UNESCO values, as well as other heritage organizations' values, and it's almost Disneyfication in some areas, and it's sanitization. And if you look at particularly the intangible heritage and what actually makes the tangible heritage work and what matters on the ground, that texture is the crucial part of the site. And that is very much back to what we were saying about the people's heritage. And so we do need to have the confidence to be able to say to people, this is really important. Without this, everything's meaningless. So a lot of it's down to the quality of the storytelling, the narrative that we create, and not being bullied by consultants who come in who don't understand the site properly. So yes, back to Moulshri's observation, we need to be confident of our ground and of the importance of the people's history and of that key relationship between the tangible and the intangible texture. If you don't have any understanding of what it is you're recording and how it works and what it did, then both the tangible and the intangible are devalued. If that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Professor Robinson.
Yes, I'm going to use another C here, and that's capacity building. Because one of the issues, I think, is that it's very easy to for people from Europe and the rest of the world to jet into Asia and again go with the normal discourse of beautification or whatever that a government or a region actually wants. And I think we have to take a slightly different approach and try and be involved, but I think the people, the local communities, have their knowledge, their sort of implicit knowledge about how these things should be done. And so we have to listen to local communities who, you know, old forestry communities, mining communities, etc. But the problem with that is we are at a critical moment, because, you know, these skills and traditions that can make a place not a Disney world, but something very real, they're dying out, you know, because people are, you know, it's just generational change. And so we have to find ways of harnessing their collective knowledges, which we can feed into processes of conservation, and don't rely upon very sort of what I would call short-term models of just making the place look attractive for tourists. But actually sort of, it may be a long-term thing to get things right. But once things are right and people understand the meaning behind why these places are like they are, why you use certain materials in certain ways, I think that becomes embedded in communities, and visitors actually want to understand this. You know, from a tourist point of view, tourists are looking more for the authentic experience. So, you know, I think capacity building and getting the politicians and planners to listen to the tacit knowledge which is embedded in these places in the first place, I think is very important indeed.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a tough job, as you mentioned, this, you know, this kind of careful curation of this, and being authentic about it, having a lot of integrity, because beautification projects at the very heart of them are just basically, you know, inauthentic ways to cherry pick certain things that you want to showcase. So I think this kind of capacity building, this crafting together, which is a slow, tedious job. These are the kind of new methods I think the study of industrial heritage can bring forth, as against what Professor Robinson says, you know, consultants parachuting into a place to offer, you know, some new ideas can be replaced if we look at industrial heritage with a more slower and careful ways to, you know, not repeat the same mistakes that you're worrying about. And well, so are we here in India constantly. So I think this is a very, very important points that you all have raised here today. I have one question from the audience, and this is from Jan of Giestam from Stockholm, and the question is to Miles, which is, and he says, you've shared the importance of coal mining sites. There are numerous such sites on the World Heritage List. Such sites carry a dark heritage in today's climate crisis. How is this addressed in these sites? Are there any good examples that you can share?
Yes, quite a lot of our mining heritage has a very difficult history. I think one of the most interesting ones is Zollverein because of its association with National Socialism. But also, yes, there is the issue of the impact that the harvesting of energy and the consumption of energy has had on the current climate crisis. And just to give you a good example, yes, last year we were celebrating the 200th anniversary of the death of James Watt and the 250th anniversary of his invention of the separate condenser, which transformed steam power and industrialization. And we encountered quite a few people who weren't very impressed and thought that this was a disaster for the planet. And so we had to mold our message to acknowledge the fact that obviously we are where we are. But at the same time, what James Watt did was improve the efficiency of the steam engine by 90%, so that basically 90% less fuel was consumed to create the same amount of power. And so there were swings and roundabouts, and this back to the contested nature of most of our industry. almost all of our industry has polluting a capacity exploitation of labour. If you look at uranium in Czech Republic and East Germany, the concentration camps, I mean, just really difficult. So yes, we have to address these issues, and as we said earlier, make them work for us, because they can work for us if they're handled correctly.
Thank you, Miles. Professor Robinson?
I just wanted to add to that in terms of what we've been trying to do at Ironbridge, because, you know, the standard narrative has always been, you know, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, of, you know, the first coke-fired furnace in 1709. But, you know, if you flip that and say, well, this is the birthplace of global warming, and that has been a very contested narrative to actually sort of put forward for some people. But 2 years ago, I brought together a range of climate change scientists, and we had a symposium actually, you know, at the site. And that was a way I saw that as a way of sort of recognizing the change which has gone on over the past decades in terms of how we think about this, and in terms of putting something back, and being seen to be actively doing something about this. And I think using industrial sites as physical sites, as platforms and stages for these sorts of debates is very powerful indeed, because, you know, it brings home the sort of the historical legacy that we've built up in terms of global warming over many years. But it also shows that we are engaged with the contemporary issues of climate change, and again, other issues as well. You know, we're talking about global warming here, but it could be anything. So there's lots of aspects of dark heritage, I think, that we can address full on and use. We can't eradicate the heritage in a sense. We have to re-narrativize it and re-adapt it and reuse it to actually sort of, you know, engage with these contemporary debates.
I think this is also the huge sense of responsibility that we have to deal with in the storytelling of industrial heritage, where, like as you said, certain climate scientists are literally marking the moment when we started altering the face of the planet irreversibly as the moment of industrial revolution. So if we are able to tackle these two things together, it places a responsibility on us to be able to tell these stories and create space for these stories within these sites. And that is a way to, you know, to respond responsibly, I think. Professor Lin, would you like to make some comments on this, in this regard?
I think your discussion just bring up one quite important issue. So far, most of the time, we are dealing with the industrial heritage on the more bright side in order to attract more tourists and so on. But in fact, the dark side or the critical heritage is an important issue among the Asia, such as colonialism and pollution and so on. So I think this will be the direction which we can work on in the future. Yeah, so this is a good direction to go.
Paul, over to you.
I guess where as the generations and times evolve, we have to pick up and address other issues and other themes, and so I'll just give you an example from New Zealand of one of our main coal mining sites, a place called Denniston, and one of the themes that we examine on site is it's a place that was the birthplace of soap in New Zealand. So, I mean, it was an awful place to work, awful working conditions, unsafe, but that actually led to a more equitable society for New Zealand in the long run, and that's one of the stories that we're able to tell. It was the start of moving towards governments that care, and better working conditions, and better living conditions as well. So I think some of these challenges that are thrown up are actually going to make us create more audience relevant experiences into the future that are again relevant to people's future. I mean, the whole COVID thing has thrown up the issue of governments that care, and that's become an issue for the whole world. And look, I've just got a couple of quick points about the beautification projects issue as well. And a very powerful tool with industrial heritage is what I would call oral history. So that's interviewing, and especially video interviewing of people who were there at the time. And there's often a need to move fast on this, and especially, I mean, there's some wonderful people. When I've been to Alisana, I've met a couple of people who I'll remember all my life, who engaged personally with me. But the power of these interviews, because you can also interview wives and the children that lived in these places, but they can actually help to bring ugly to life. Like, ugly becomes a powerful part of the brought to life, and it can make us appreciate where we've come from and where we've gone to, you know, in terms of working conditions and living conditions. So there are strategies where ugly, actually, the difference between ugly and beauty becomes a strength in our story. So that's, and my third point on all of this is that I think one of the strengths of forest railways as a heritage investment is that they can actually legitimately be a beautification project. Like, if some of the forest railways want to have a regeneration and forest enhancement project as as their future roles, then that is actually a legitimate role in terms of authenticity and integrity. Many of them, especially ones in Europe, were built to be sustainable industrial facilities. So
thank you, Paul. I'd now like to invite Professor Lin to make some concluding comments. I think we have had a very, very diverse set of concepts being raised in this conversation. So if you could come in to summarize this for us, please. Thank you.
Very excellent moderator, bring up a lot of discussion, and thank you all for your excellent presentation and Hsiao-Wei's participation for 2 days for our discussion. I think in the end, basically, Moulshri already summing up with some keywords, such as community cooperation and critical the climate change and so on. I think we can emphasize those points and to work on our continuous work. So first of all, we can discover the communities of Asia and continue our close or transnational cooperation in the future, go through the AMIS network. And the second point, I think currently we need to engage with more younger generation to use industrial heritage as a kind of bridge to bridge up the different generation and also bring up to our daily life. And this is all our effort for the future. Yeah, and the third one is about the adaptive management and some resilience development. So we should currently, although we are all stuck in our own country, but I think this is also a good timing to look inward to find out what do we have, and in order to prepare for the futures, such as other international global tourism and so on, to continue to develop our network. So for this 2 days conference, I think we have overall a global point of view from Miles and from Mike Robson, and also Alex here earlier. He also talked about a lot of different international organizations which already work on the related field. So I think we can outreaching with this kind of connection with ANI. And the second point is about the function and the continued work of ANI. I think we will continue work as what we try to do as information exchange platform and also cooperation for each other in the future. Yeah. So lastly, I would be very happy to announce that thank you for Moulshri's enthusiasm. She's trying to send a proposal for our fourth forum for the next year. So we look forward to Moulshri's forum proposal in order to have our on the Asia Industrial Heritage Network conference in the next year. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful to have you this afternoon, and we look forward to more such sessions from ANI. Bye-bye. Stay well.
Bye-bye.